Right, hello guys, welcome back. So today we are talking about Cold Comfort and whether it's worth grinding given that Hezen Vengeance also exists. Because these two rockets are very similar in terms of the perks they can get, the frame, what they're sort of meant for in terms of the damage meta, so I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at Cold Comfort today and basically give you the go-ahead if it's worth your time to grind for this thing. So first we should start by looking at the perks, so I've brought up D2 Foundry here and I'm just going to quickly go through all of these perks that we see and point out the main ones that you should be going for. So looking in the left column, immediately we can write off Rhyme Stealer. This is basically a useless perk unless you're wanting to use a rocket for ad clear and shattering stasis crystals, but I don't think you should be, really. Unfortunately, Reconstruction is a pretty bad perk now, so I wouldn't recommend this either. Impulse Amplifier, no. Same for Perpetual Motion. Envious Arsenal is going to be pretty much the only perk you're going to want in the first column. Tracking, no, you don't need this, not at all. So in the first column, Envious Arsenal is basically the only perk you're going to be wanting to look for. And then in the right column, we do actually have a little more interesting stuff to look at. Elemental Honing, this is what I would recommend going for if you get a roll. I would go for Envious Elemental Honing if you can get it. Bipod is something I'm going to touch on in a moment because there's quite a cool tech you can do with Bipod for sort of reserve storing. So keep this in mind because if you get a double drop with Envious Elemental Honing and Bipod, I would recommend keeping that. Sword Logic is interesting. I think this is the first time we've had it on a rocket launcher and it can give you a 50% damage buff if you get a kill on a yellow bar beforehand, but again it's a bit awkward because you're trying to get kills with a rocket to prep it for damage, and it does last for 16.5 seconds when enhanced. However, I think it's just a bit of a gimmick perk on this rocket. You don't really want to be relying on this. Explosive Light, bit of a dead perk on rockets given that Honing and Bait and Switch are also on it, so I wouldn't go for Explosive Light at all. Also has a terrible interaction with Wolfpack rounds. Bait and Switch, bit of an older generation perk. I would go for Elemental Honing over Bait and Switch, but if you have one with Bait and Switch, that's also fine. Remember that Bait and Switch is a 30% damage buff, where at maximum stacks Elemental Honing is 35% for elemental weapons, 40 for kinetics. And then we also have Chill Clip. I believe Aegis posted a video recently discussing Chill Clip and the fact that it gives you a lot of total damage when you are solo, but bottom line, just don't use Chill Clip on a rocket, especially in team scenarios. Just let that be known. So as I said, the main role you're going to want to go for is Envious Arsenal Elemental Honing, because when it comes to dealing damage in this game these days, you're going to be on a prismatic subclass if you're the damage dealing role. This is the main role you're going to want to go for because Elemental Honing is going to be the meta damage perk going forward over Bait and Switch. Also, remember that Cold Comfort has the Restoration Ritual Origin trait, which used to be the best origin trait in the game for rockets, but then, well, Time Lost Magazine came out. But anyway, this origin trait is still pretty good. Reviving an ally or performing a finisher will load a bonus round into the magazine. So as you can see here, I have one in the mag, and if I perform a finisher on this drag, it's going to allow me to shoot both of them. As you can see, it has Restoration Ritual in the bottom left corner, and if I shoot one, it'll instantly load the next without having to reload. So that's the refresher of the origin trait from the Ghost of the Deep weapons. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there is also an interesting tech you can do that involves Bipod and rockets that get multiple perks in general. So unfortunately, I don't have a Cold Comfort which has a damage perk and Bipod selectable, but Hezen Vengeance can also get this role, and I do have a Hezen that has this combination. So basically, this is like an ammo workaround for getting maximum reserves without needing reserve armor mods during running in like a raid or a dungeon encounter, for example. And to do that, you're obviously going to need your preferential first column perk, which is going to be Envious Arsenal in my case, your preferred damage perk, Elemental Honing, and Bipod selectable. Because, as you may know, Bipod gives you a lot of reserves. It gives you 14, in fact, without any reserve pieces. As you can see, I don't have any reserve pieces here. In fact, I believe it is less because Envious Arsenal does give you a hidden reserve mod when enhanced, so I think it's going to be 12 rather than 14, but it's a lot of rockets. And without Bipod, the maximum reserves with reserve mods is 11. So what the trick is basically you have one loadout with Bipod selected, which is your running loadout, and then when it comes to DPS, rather than having one DPS loadout, you instead have two. The first is kind of like an intermediary loadout, which has the reserve pieces on your chest piece, still with Bipod selected. So when I swap to this loadout with my reserve pieces, I still have 14 rockets, but the cap of my reserves is increased because I have them. And then if I swap to my actual damage loadout, which has the surges and dexterities and so on, in this loadout, as you can see, I have changed it to Elemental Honing, but I still keep the double reserves. And when I swap to it, I lose a few rockets, but I have 11 without Bipod with Elemental Honing selected. So this is basically a really nice way of having maximum reserves going into damage without having to run them during the running phase in the first place. So that lets you run things like resist mods or charged ups, whatever you might like. And the only way this is possible is with having Bipod on the rocket, and Cold Comfort does have that luxury. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend going for that perfect Cold Comfort with elemental honing plus Bipod in that column, because it's going to be very difficult for you to get that. It's rather rare, but we'll discuss why you should probably grind for a Hezen instead in just a moment, but that's just something to keep in mind. I thought I'd point it out. This is probably a little known fact. I mean, I didn't know about this until recently, so yeah. The thing you're probably more interested in is how much damage can this rocket actually do? Well, despite it not having as good a perk selection as Hezen Vengeance and the origin trait being slightly weaker, it is still pretty good. So the first damage setup I want to show you today is on Warlock. We're basically going to start damage with a prismatic loadout, pop our Arc Soul with Getaway Artist, and then swap to Sanguine with a well from a teammate, and we're just going to cycle through these three weapons here. I have a Liturgy with Envious Chill Clip, a Cartesian Coordinate with Vorpal, and Cold Comfort with Envious Elemental Honing, and we're just going to pop super and cycle through these weapons. The subclass is up on screen, but I will have the dim loadouts to all of these damage rotations that I'm going to show you in the description, so don't worry too much about copying these, but this is what the damage actually looks like. Please no insta damage.
Oh.
No insta damage, let's go. Oh, it's perfect. It's literally perfect. Let's go.
Yippee!
That was pretty good. So what, 4.7? Oh!
Ooh,
Tell you, dude. I know it. I know it. I know this health bar like the fucking back of my hand. So yeah, it's definitely not bad at all. We're almost killing Greg with the rocket, so that's a pretty good sign. However, I would argue that it's actually even better on Titan, because with Titan, it's a lot harder to get access to stasis damage than it is on Warlock, because with Warlock, you have the stasis turret, obviously. So the fact that the gun is stasis, it's going to cover that part of elemental honing a lot easier. So for the Titan, we have a similar setup. I've just gone for Liturgy again, but this time I have a Psycho Pump with Envious Arsenal Elemental Honing, so all three of my weapons have Envious Arsenal on them, meaning we can very quickly swap between them in a very sort of satisfying manner. The subclass again is here. All of this will be in the dim links in the description, don't worry about that. We're gonna have Curious to improve the damage of our Thunder Crash. So here is what the damage looks like on a Titan. Nice, nice. That was good.
Nice.
Nice. All right. 4.6. Yeah, baby.
Oh. 3 for 3.
Yes, sir. So overall, this rocket is definitely not that bad. It pulls some serious damage, and keep in mind with the Titan, we are only 100k less damage than the Warlock, and we didn't have Weaken for like 75% of the phase. So if I had a teammate applying Divinity, then I probably would have killed Greg on the Titan rotation, so it's still very good as a damage rocket. The problems start to arise when you begin to compare it to Hezen Vengeance though, because even though it has the same perks as Hezen Vengeance, the origin trait for Hezen is just so much stronger, it's not even fair. Being able to simply cast your super and then have your magazine size doubled for 20 seconds is honestly insane. It allows you to get your rockets off way faster than if you didn't have that perk, obviously because you're getting them off twice as fast. And despite stasis damage being harder to come by, it's still very much achievable via stasis turret on Warlock. You also have the Glacier Grenade on Titan, and Hunters have the stasis component of the Hailfire Spike Prismatic Grenade. So there are ways around it, and you don't necessarily need to have it as the element of your gun weapon just for the purposes of making things easier. Because if you look at Hezen, it's a solar weapon. In a similar way to stasis, it is also kind of annoying to get. The point I'm trying to make is that stasis and solar damage are kind of equally as hard to come by. So it's not like because we have stasis on the rocket, it just makes things a million times easier. Because in a sense, you have also taken out the easy solar access that Hezen Vengeance gives you, so you need to find it elsewhere. So bottom line, Hezen Vengeance is definitely a better rocket given that it can get the same perks and it just has a origin tray which is miles and miles and miles ahead. However, that isn't to say that Cold Comfort is a bad rocket. It's definitely a very good rocket, and I would recommend getting one if you can. Plus, it's also arguably easier to get than Hezen Vengeance because dungeons are more accessible than raids, and Rite of the Nine is 1,000 times more accessible than farming Vault of Glass because it's free, it has explore mode, you have focusing options, you can pull rewards from the chest, you can get shiny variants that look cooler. Definitely farm this if you can. It's going to be quite easy to get the role you want with the sheer amount of loot you get from Rite of the Nine, which is a huge positive. But all of this makes me think that Time Lost Magazine is eventually going to catch a small nerf in Edge of Fate or something like that because it's such a strong origin trait. So overall, definitely do get yourself a Cold Comfort if you can with the role of Envious Arsenal Elemental Honing. Bonus points if you can get Bipod selectable. In this case, I have Chill Clip, but you know, if you can get Bipod in that slot, that'd be better. So yeah, definitely very solid rocket launcher. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.